7時のニュースです。アメリカのトゥルーマン大統領は朝鮮の新たな危機に対処するため、必要とあらば中共軍に対し原子爆弾を使用することも考慮中であると言明しました。もちろん原子爆弾は使用されないよう希望しているが、最終的に原子爆弾を使うかどうかは現地司令官の決定一つにかかっているなど14条からなる声明文を発表しました。
人間いうやつは証拠りもないもんじゃ。我が手で我が首を絞めよう。正義の戦争より不正義の平和の方がまだましやいうことがなんでわからんかの。
旦那さん、安子さんが。旦那さん。
静馬さん、静馬さん。
雄一を病院へ置いて私は戻りますけど、旦那さん休んどってつかさい。
大丈夫じゃ。きっと治る。大丈夫じゃ。大丈夫じゃ。大丈夫じゃ。
今もし向こうの山に虹が出たら奇跡が起きる。不吉の前兆である白い虹ではない。色鮮やかな五彩の虹が出たら安子の病気は治るのだ。
I think I need a little light now. It's very unsentimental, simple, and I think heartbreaking. It's a little obvious, but works anyway. The fish is full of vitality. He's been trying to grow fish for the entire movie. So the fish finally is powerful and big as she's in her last breath, and she has a momentary last burst of energy before dying. What does this have to do with human rights and the human? You see here politics entering quite explicitly. He hears an announcement that Truman is starting nuclear testing, atomic bomb, and the possibility of using another atomic bomb has arisen. So there's a connection between this young woman dying of A-bomb disease and the fear that what was supposed to have been the last use of an atomic bomb may not have been the last use. So this novel and this movie were very much part of, well, the novel especially was part of the peace movement in the 60s and the anti-nuclear movement. To address this question of what this has to do and what the abject and what the ill body and what scars, and specifically keloid scars, the external burning that people suffered in the A-bombs, has to do with politics and the human and human rights, perhaps. I want to read you a little bit from a book called Hiroshima Notes by the novelist O.A. Kenzaburo. His family name is O.E. Yeah. Hiroshima notes. Any of you heard of O.A. Consalvadoral? Yeah, some of you. He's still writing. In 1962 or 3, his son was born with a brain injury, but that was external. That at the same year, O.A. went to Hiroshima to do reportage. This is the product of the reportage. The reportage involved him seeing the victims of the bomb with scars and burning and external tissue that reminded him of his son. So his son was brain damaged. He witnessed these people, and this for him was transformative and turned him into a political writer and activist. So let me read you just 4 brief passages from this book. The first is about humanism, or as we say in New York, humanism, with no H. Okay. He says a young mother who is a friend of the old woman's daughter, gave birth to a stillborn, deformed child. The young mother was an A-bomb victim who had suffered burns and consequent keloid scars. She had prepared herself for misfortune, but wanted to have a look at her baby. When the doctor refused to permit it, she asked her husband to look at it. He went to see the baby, only to find that it had already been disposed of. I am told that the young mother lamented, "If only I could see my baby, I would have courage." He talks a lot about this courage to see the sick and the ill. If only I could see my baby, I would have courage. I was astonished by the word courage in her otherwise grief-stricken and hopeless statement. The word belongs among those which have been given a new depth of meaning by the existentialists. The hospital policy of not showing deformed stillborn babies to their mothers is certainly humane. And here I think is a really critical moment. He says, limits need to be maintained on what we are allowed to see so that we will remain human. But if a mother wants to see her dead, deformed child so as to regain her own courage, she is attempting to live at the minimum limit under which a human being can remain human. This may be interpreted as a valiant expression of humanism beyond popular humanism. A new humanism sprouting from the misery of Hiroshima. A new humanism sprouting from the misery of Hiroshima. Who is not moved by the spirit of this young mother, for whom even a deformed, stillborn baby would be a sign to which she could cling in order to regain her courage? I'll come back to that at the end. The next passage is about wounds. In times such as this, I want to remember and keep on remembering the thoughts of the people of Hiroshima, the first people and the first place to experience full force the world's worst destructive capability. Hiroshima is like a nakedly exposed wound inflicted on all mankind. Like all wounds, this one also poses 2 potential outcomes: the hope of human recovery and the danger of fatal corruption. Unless we persevere in remembering the Hiroshima experience, especially the thoughts of those who underwent that unprecedented experience, the faint signs of recovery emerging from this place and people will begin to decay and real degeneration will set in. And now about shame and humiliation. As for humiliation and shame, we can recall the old man who protested the resumption of nuclear tests by attempting self-disembowelment, but failed, and thus felt miserably shamed. His sense of shame itself, however, gives substance to the sense of dignity, his sense of dignity. So it is with the solitary old A-bomb victims who, ashamed to survive when the young die, speak of this with dignity as an inversion. A young woman with whom I became acquainted at the A-bomb hospital and met there again a year later told me that she was ashamed of herself, and it is in Hiroshima that a great many girls stay indoors because they are ashamed of the ugly keloid scars on their faces. How can we understand the sense of shame that the A-bomb victims feel about their experiences without also being ashamed of ourselves? What a frightening inversion of feeling. A girl is ashamed of her face disfigured by keloids. In her mind, she divides all people on earth into 2 groups. The sense of shame is the line separating persons with keloid scars from all others without them. The girls with keloids feel ashamed of themselves before those who have none. They feel humiliated by curious glances of all other people who have no keloid disfigurations. And finally, if a person is so clear-eyed as to see a crisis in its totality, He cannot avoid falling into despair. Only the person with duller vision, who sees a crisis as part of ongoing life, can possibly cope with it. It is precisely the dullness, the restricted vision, that permits one to act with reckless human courage in the face of crisis, without succumbing to despair. The lesser vision is backed by patience and, in fact, is capable of penetrating insight into the nature of a crisis. That was a lot to absorb, me reading to you. But from what you picked up, any responses or questions or comments? Yeah.
Why is it so shameful that they like just scarring? What is it?
Why was it so shameful? The question was, why was it so shameful, the scarring? One reason was hinted at before, that people were stigmatized as possibly being tainted or poisoned, sort of a superstitious, the way in which some people think cancer is catchy, right? So there's a feeling of infection and the feeling of discomfort with being with people who are victims and who really look it. There's that, and then I think there's just something like natural human vanity and the feeling of showing one's wounds on one's surface. So it's partially very personal, and I suppose maybe more extreme with women, I'm not sure, because of gender expectations, but it's certainly social in this case as well.
There wasn't a long period where people victims of the Holocaust didn't reveal themselves as such.
Right.
In years when people just wouldn't speak of it.
Right. Yeah. And there's also the feeling of not wanting to be known just by one's victimization, right? I mean, what strikes me here particularly is this idea that the duller vision is more penetrating and that there's a humanism that's not based on human mastery of the world. What he says is that humanism leads to the bomb, but there's a humanism based on the abject and the scarred and the partial and the weak. And that humanism will not have us try to create solutions to problems that are global and that are sort of abstract and carefully thought out, but they will allow us to address problems locally, helping individuals who have suffered, trying to stop the proliferation of nuclear bombs, etc. And that was the basis of his politics and of the movement in the 60s. Yes?
Was the policy of not showing children to mothers implemented after the case?
You know, that's a really good question. I have a partial answer. And there have been studies written about policies in Japanese hospitals and what is shown and not shown, and when a person is told, for example, that they're dying or they have cancer or not. And there has been a tradition of telling victims less, right? For example, even now I've heard of people who've told me that when a family member has been diagnosed with cancer, the doctors have told the family members and not the patient. So I think this is not an incredible surprise, but I think